Parke, Festivals of the Athenians, Poseideon. The 6th month, Poseideon, was dedicated to Poseideon, and once more its name implies the existence of a festival, Poseideon, not known to any great extent from our sources. Traditionally, the 8th of the month was the date appropriate to Poseideon, just as the 7th belonged to Apollon and the 6th to Artemis. So one would expect that to be the day of Poseideon on which the god's festival was held. But curiously, the only evidence for it is in the sacrificial calendars of a local district and of a private guild. The month seems a strange choice in which to honour the god of the sea, for as it corresponded approximately with December, it must have fallen in the time of year in which there was least navigation. We do know from literary sources that there was a festival once every 5th year at Sunium in honour of Poseideon, evidently then a major event. But as it included a regatta, one may seriously doubt the suggestion, accepted by Dubner, that it took place in this month. The organisers would have been asking to have their programme cancelled because of bad weather. The choice of December for worshipping the god of the sea suggests either some paradox of offering to him when he most showed his formidable power, or else its origins go back to a time when Poseideon was a deity of much wider province. Modern research has shown much evidence to support the view that in the Mycenaean period, Poseideon may have been, as his name seems to mean, the lord of the earth, or the husband of the earth goddess. The local Attic legend of his contest with Athena for the sovereignty of the land points to a time when he was a dominant god in Athens. And throughout the Ionian world, a month Poseideon and a festival Poseideon in his honour were commonly found. Whether elsewhere also it was always in winter would be less easy to prove. One general point may be noted. Just as the Attic year, with its preponderance of months named after festivals of Apollo and of Artemis, was probably arranged under the influence of the cult of Apollo, these months run in a continuous series from Elaphebolian March to Paenepsian October, with the one doubtful exception of Scirophorian June. The months which are not associated with Apollo form another block from Maimacterion, November, to Anthesterion, February, inclusive. Also, as we shall see, they seem to have been dedicated each to a festival of one of the other major gods, as though to guarantee them from some recognition. We've already seen Maimacterion for Zephyr and Poseideon for Poseidon. Of the two following, Gamalion was dedicated to Hera and Anthesterion to Dionysos. This distribution of the year into 2 blocks of months, one Apolline and one for the rest, corresponds to the belief that Apollo was absent in the land of the Hyperboreans for the winter months and returned in the spring. This left only such a month as December open to be assigned to Poseideon. Towards the end of the month, on the 26th, there took place the festival of the Aloa. The name obviously suggested that it was connected with the threshing floor, Halos, the circular area covered with cobblestones, such as is still to be seen near Greek villages. But this raised a difficulty to ancient scholars because clearly December was not the month for threshing, which ought to follow directly on the harvest, in the hot, dry months of high summer. So they spent much effort in providing alternative derivations, such as that the name was derived from the word for gathering and referred to the people who assembled for the festival. Or else, if the derivation from threshing floor was retained, it was explained that the festivities took place at that site. None of this is very convincing, and the efforts of modern scholars, such as Solmsen and Nilsson, to derive the name from roots, meaning cultivated field, and so to connect it with agricultural fertility, are not much more successful. The name is best left as unexplained. The most ancient references are so concerned with the derivation that they do not tell much about the festival itself, except that it was held in honour of the Meteor and Dionysos. The only description occurs in a rather muddled commentary on Lucian, where we are told that a secret rite confined to women was held at Eleusis. The magistrates prepared a feast which consisted of every sort of food, except those forbidden in the mysteries: pomegranates, apples, eggs and fowls, and certain specified kind of fish. When the banquet was ready, the magistrates departed, leaving it to the women. The scholiast explained the rich feast as demonstrating that it was in Eleusis that mankind had learned humane eating. The conduct of the women, however, introduced quite another element into the rite. They carried models of male and female genital organs and indulged in uninhibited obscenity of language and abuse of the kind which we have already seen attributed to other festivals confined to women. Even the priestesses went about whispering to the wives that they should take lovers as a piece of secret advice. Also on the tables were cakes in the shape of phalli and pudenda, and much wine was consumed. The description of this obscene banquet might be regarded as exaggerated if it was not for the fact that it is possible to illustrate it from various pictures on Greek vases. These are unfortunately not labelled with ancient inscriptions to identify the happenings, but some correspond closely to what is described by the scholiast, so it can be taken that the account is correct enough. Our ancient evidence usually mentions Eleusis as the scene of the Haloa, and one is perhaps right in supposing that it only took place there. Evidently, it was in origin a fertility festival connected with the Eleusinian claim to be the source of corn for mankind. The purpose would be to stimulate the growth of the corn from seed. In this connection, A.B. Cook and Deibner have called attention to a red figure vase in the British Museum, which probably illustrates some part of the attendant ritual. A girl leans forward to the right and sprinkles something from a rectangular box held in her left arm. Before her on the ground stand 4 phalli, with round their bases the leaves of corn springing. The phalli are presumably clay models, such as we are told women carried at the Haloa. The girl has brought them to a field and set them up in a row amid the first shoots of the new season's growth. She is sprinkling the place with something meant together with the presence of the phalli to stimulate their growth. If this is correctly identified with the practices of the Haloa, one may suppose that what began as a phallic rite, practised by women to promote the growth of wheat, ended by becoming an all-night orgy of banqueting in an atmosphere of indecency. It is therefore not surprising that the allusions to the festival in Greek authors from the 4th century BC onwards tend to connect it with courtesans. These ladies of easy virtue were not concerned greatly with the fertility of crops, but the tone of the banquet would have suited them perfectly. An episode in one of Demosthenes' speeches illustrates the connection of a courtesan with the festival. Archias, the Hierophant of the Mysteries in the mid-4th century BCE, was convicted of impiety for offences committed in connection with his office. There are strong grounds for believing that the real motive of the prosecution was political. Archias had been in close relations with the oligarchic government of Thebes and had tried to warn them before their overthrow by Pelopidas. The validity of the charge is less significant than the fact that it was made. It alleged that he had offered a sacrifice at the hearth in the courtyard at Eleusis during the Haloa for Sinope the courtesan, though it was not lawful to offer sacrifices on that day, and the sacrifice did not concern him, but the priestess of Demeter. The grounds of this charge are impossible for us to check, but one notes that the account of the festival in the Scholia mentioned the part played by the priestesses, and men were excluded from the banquet. Late grammarians write as though the offerings made to Demeter were first fruits of grain, and though this seems to be connected with their belief that the name of the festival was derived from the threshing floor, it is likely that it was not an occasion for blood sacrifices. Besides, it is plausible enough to find a prominent courtesan, perhaps with a view to notoriety, persuading the Hierophant to perform an offering for her in the most conspicuous place at Eleusis on this popular occasion. Beside the worship of Demeter, the Haloa is described as being dedicated to Dionysos. It is probable that he is intrusive into what was originally a festival of corn. The phallic element would fit with Dionysiac rites and prepare the way for his introduction. Also, as we shall see, the other festival held in the month Poseideon was Bacchic, and may well, as Deibner suggests, have influenced to the development of the Haloa. In addition, there is reference to a procession in honour of Poseideon. As it was his month, this is reasonable enough. Perhaps also the men, excluded from the banquet to the meteor, found a way to assert themselves in worship of a male deity. One inscription from Eleusis, which honours a general called Aristophanes because he had invited all the citizens to the festival, thinking they ought to have a share in the good things provided in the sanctuary, points to a separate banquet for the men, being served on at least one occasion. The latter part of Poseideon was also the occasion for a popular festival held in various localities all over Attica. This was the country Dionysia, which, like the Aperturia, was not tied to a single date in the month, but was celebrated according to the choice of each neighbourhood. It was the religious ceremony from which the great Athenian festivals of the Lenaea and the city Dionysia were derived, but it survived as a local festival in various places throughout Attica, to some extent retaining the primitive character of the original ritual, but in many parts influenced by the development of the city festivals and tending to imitate them on a more modest scale. Plutarch gives a rather sentimentally wistful picture of the primitive form of the ceremony. He says, the patriarchal rite of the Dionysia consisted in a procession in the old days organised in a popular and cheerful style, a jar of wine and vine, then someone dragging a he-goat, another followed carrying a wicker basket of raisins, and to crown it all the phallus. But now these things are ignored and eclipsed when gold vessels are borne along, and expensive costumes and teams of horses driven and masks. Thus the modest minimum of wealth and usefulness is overwhelmed by the useless and excessive. Plutarch is writing of the extravagant splendour of processions in the days of Roman imperialism, but the picture which he draws, in contrast to primitive simplicity, even if we cannot be sure that he was thinking of Attica, was true enough for it. This fact is demonstrated by Aristophanes, writing more than 500 years earlier. In the Athenians, so as to rouse in his audience the regrets for the peaceful days before the Peloponnesian War, his hero, Dicaeopolis, as soon as he has opted out by a separate peace, announces that he will celebrate a country Dionysia. The parody of a procession is produced by his daughter acting as basket bearer, Caniphorus, the slave Xanthias bearing the phallus, perhaps assisted by a second slave, and Dicaeopolis himself leading the he-goat. The scene must have given plenty of scope for comic business, and Aristophanes mixes in ribald jokes with the ritual, but the picture of the ceremony was basically realistic and meant to remind his audience of the joys of peace in the country. Dicaeopolis. Keep holy silence, keep holy silence. Chorus. Quiet, everyone. Didn't you hear the man call silence? This is the one we're looking for. But all of you stand clear, for the fellow seems to be coming out to sacrifice. Dicaeopolis. Keep holy silence, keep holy silence. Let her go ahead a little. You, the basket bearer. Xanthias, set the phallus upright. Put down the basket, daughter, that we may perform the consecration. Daughter. Mother, give me here the soup ladle, so that I can pour some soup over this flat cake. This was a parody of consecrating the victim, which should have been a he-goat, by sprinkling sanctified corn over it. Dicaeopolis. Well, that is right enough. O Dionysos, Lord, in thankfulness, may it please you that I lead this procession and offer sacrifice, together with my slaves, and celebrate successfully the country Dionysia. Come, daughter, see that you carry the basket nicely, and put on a vinegar expression. At this point there would have been some business parodying the manner of an aristocratic maiden acting as Caniphorus. Xanthias, you too, to keep the phallus upright behind the basket bearer, while I shall follow and sing the phallic song. Wife, look at the spectacle of the procession from the roof. Forward! Then Dicaeopolis sings a phallic song full of obscenities. The Athenian audience in 425 BCE will have found much to laugh at in this parody, but also many of them refugees in Athens owing to the Spartan invasions, will have felt at heart a longing for the country festivals. To the modern reader, even those parts that are not indecent waken no chords of religious sympathy. But we must recognise that to the contemporary Athenian it must have had a sentimental appeal comparable to that which Dickens evokes by a family Christmas party in A Christmas Carol. Like Christmas festivities, it was shared by all, even the slaves, and for this fact we do not depend only on Aristophanes' comic version. Also, like Christmas, it was the occasion for traditional games. A goat skin was blown up and greased, the contest consisting in jumping on top of it and trying to stand there. This was called askoliasmos, but the word properly meant standing on one leg, and there were various trials of skill based on that handicap. A contest to hop the longest distance, or a form of tig in which the player had to hop on one leg and try and touch the other players with the leg which he held off the ground. Or all hopped together, counting the jumps, and the one who reached the highest number was the winner. These games suggest what Plutarch called the popular and cheerful style of the original festival. But under the influence of the greater Athenian occasions, the local townships developed theirs. For instance, local theatres were constructed on the lines of the Dionysiac theatre at Athens, and evidently tragedies and comedies were performed just as in the capital. When Demosthenes wishes to pour scorn on the career of his opponent, Aeschines, who had been earlier in life a tragic actor, he refers to the performances in which he had taken part as the country Dionysia. He had been third actor in a team led by Symmachus and Socrates, who were known as the Deep Groaners, barnstormers. One is to picture a touring company, playing to audiences at the local festivals and specialising in heavy emotional roles. It may have been convenient in this connection that there was no single fixed date for these Dionysia, since this would allow the possibility of organising a tour through the Attic townships. One local festival stood out beyond the others and was not a country celebration. This was held in the Piraeus, in the theatre which still survives. The official, Demarchos, responsible for organising it, was not left to local choice, but was allotted from a shortlist by the central government. There was the traditional procession, and tragedies and comedies were performed. The standard of these must have been acceptable to the sophisticated, for we find that when Athens in the Hellenistic period was visited by an embassy from Colophon renewing the traditional links between the two cities, the ambassadors were invited to a performance in the Dionysiac theatre in the Piraeus, which must have coincided with their visit. The festivals most prominent in Poseideon, the Haloa and the country Dionysia, were evidently in origins fertility festivals. The Haloa may originally have been designed to encourage the growth of the seedling corn. The Dionysia shows little sign of being directly concerned with the vine, which would not be growing in December. Both festivals were predominantly phallic in emphasis. They fell around the period of the shortest and darkest days of the year, so they may have had some connection with that season. The Greeks, unlike the pagans of northern Europe, show no consciousness in their ritual that the sun is at its lowest point and may need strengthening and encouragement. Instead, the need may have been a human one, to cheer oneself up at the most depressing season by games and feasts. Apollon had vanished and Dionysos had taken his place at Delphi, and in Attica, Poseideon and the 2 months that follow are notable for Dionysiac festivals.